And so, welcome everyone to today's session on building resilience, and really looking forward to welcoming all of you and to hear your insights. Just a few ground rules just before we get started. So, just for the sake of just a smooth webinar today, in terms of background noise, just if you could mute your microphones. If you wish to put any views forward, and we're certainly welcome to put forward any views, thoughts, anytime during the session. Please just unmute your microphones and make a contribution. We'll also be looking at the chat function as well if there's any questions come up. This is designed to be interactive. So Leona and I, this is our third session, isn't it, Leona?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And previously we talked about smashing the anger cycle and turning stress into success. And I think building resilience, it does build on those concepts that we talked about. And so really what we want to have you take away, some sort of practical tips and strategies to build resilience in the workplace and all areas of life, I think, as well, because resilience is needed everywhere, and we in all parts of our lives, and we get hit with situations, traumas. How do we respond to that? And so we will have time for questions as well. So Leona, perhaps if you would like to just introduce yourself, your background, and why resilience is so interesting for you as a topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. So hi, I'm Leona Banfield. I'm the founder of Ginamai Consulting and Training. Essentially, with my consulting agency, I help nonprofits in the social services sector kind of build their mid-level managers so that, they can lead cohesive, collaborative, and innovative teams. And I do that in the form of one-to-one coaching, group leadership programs. I also work with individuals to build their leadership skills, both in the workplace and in their personal lives as well. Because I think these two things come together, and in the middle of a pandemic, they've certainly come together, right? So my passion really at the end of the day is inspiring people to live their best lives and to be their best selves. So that's the work I do, and that's who I am as far as being out there in the market and working with my clients. Yeah.
And do you find, Leona, that in the work that you do with clients, say for example the one-on-one coaching, that resilience is a key factor in developing them?
It is, and I would say it's even more so now. I think this topic is so timely, given what we are managing. It's kind of hard to believe. I think I said this on our last fireside chat. We were a year into a pandemic.
Yeah.
And we're over a year into a pandemic now. And what is this going to mean on the outset? And I know we're going to talk a bit about burnout today, because I think a lot of us are burning out, whether it's professionally or personally. This pandemic has had an effect on our lives in a really profound way. So resiliency, I think, or resilience is huge, not only to set us up for success now, but, when we think about, years after this pandemic, I do think that we are going to be feeling the mental health implications of all of this long after this pandemic is over. So how can we start having this conversation now, really setting ourselves up for success now, so that when we come out of this pandemic, we're able to cope with our new normal, whatever that's going to look like. We're able to really manage the changes that we're going to be faced with effectively.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about that as well. I'll just briefly introduce myself as well, but it's a very, very interesting point you've raised, that resilience is going to be needed longer term because of the mental health, the collateral damage, if you like, from lockdown and what we've all been put through physically. Hopefully now with vaccinations coming on, and we're hopefully now starting to move out of the pandemic. But what are the long-term implications going to be on our sort of mental health and the way that we approach life in the future? How much damage is there? So I think that's a very, very interesting point, that this is something that you need to start building now in order to support you in the future. So great points. So my background is more corporate, and I work with organizations. I'm very passionate about creating better cultures, and primarily using EQ and authentic leadership as a foundation for that. And to your point, Leona, I think that there is going to be some mental health challenges for people. And one of the things I think in the workplace that I've seen in 30 years working in the corporate field is that emotional intelligence and all the related skills around that is sadly lacking in so many organizations, and there's so much support. But often I found that organizations are not always enlightened enough to appreciate that it is a good investment to make in staff, and they don't always appreciate that there is a problem. And so I've had situations where I talk to a board chair, for example, and they say, "Oh, I'm EQ friendly, I'm fantastic, I don't need any of this." And then I sit in the board meeting, they're shouting down anyone that disagrees with them.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes people don't always know what they don't know. And I think one of the things for me, particularly on the personal coaching side that I've been doing a bit of work on, is to help them navigate, I guess, blind spots, really. I mean, everyone's different, and it's helping them to navigate some of these blind spots around what it is that they are getting stuck with. And so just making small adjustments, I think, to your mindset and your approach can make a dramatic difference. And I'm already seeing that with some people I'm coaching. And so I love it because I think it helps people. And what we're doing today, I think, just imparting some practical tips and strategies just from what we've experienced, what we've read about and learned about, I think is so important to do that. And I'm so happy that, people are taking the time to come out and listen to us. And hopefully, I think we'll get a lot from this.
Mhm.
But that's a
Yeah,
little
Paul,
bit about me. Yeah.
I was going to say, I love what you're saying about this being like small incremental changes we need to make to
Mm,
our behavior. And I
yes.
think that's so pivotal in this discussion too. We have a tendency, well, maybe I speak for myself here, a tendency to think that resilience might just be, or any of these like leadership concepts that we talk about when I think about clients that I've worked with, that there's kind of like an on-off switch. I can just turn
Mm,
these things on. There's that element, but then also to what you were just speaking about too as well is I think there's a lot of jargon that people can
mm,
speak to, but then to your point, behaviorally, we're not seeing it actually show up in the workplace.
mm.
Like I can talk about emotional intelligence, but then when I sit with my people, I can't actually practice it. And
Yeah.
because I think and that's the important piece here is how are we shifting our behaviors and creating smaller goals that are manageable to start building this. I talk with my clients a lot around how do we shift our defaults. So if my default is to respond angry in this situation, how do I make my default now to be, oh, I'm going to pause and reflect? But that takes practice, and that takes layering on of small,
Yes.
I call them laughably small habit changes or behavior changes that we are constantly practicing to create this new default in how we respond. And I think resilience is one of those things that we can do, and we can approach it from this standpoint of, yeah, we need to build it, and we can't just overnight become resilient. There's a practice and work that does need to go into developing that skill.
I think that's a really good point, because this isn't something that, and I've spoken to many people that say, "Oh, I've been on a course in emotional intelligence," or I've
Right.
learned about resilience, and therefore I've learned about it, therefore I'm good. But it's a form of study, and it's a habit, and to your point, incremental changes and practice over time. To some extent, it's like, for example, learning a new language or playing a new instrument. You have to practice, and you've got to be consistent, and you make incremental progress over time. And so it's not something that can be done overnight. So I think that's a very
Mhm.
important concept to understand. And often when I've been speaking to organizations, they say, well, come in and let's do a presentation, and then that's it. But it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It is about habits, isn't it? So how, thinking about resilience in its sort of broadest sense, Leona, how would you sort of define it? What does being resilient mean to you in your situation? Why is it important to you?
Uh, yeah, it's a good question. Resilience, I guess, is just, it's an interesting concept. It's not one that I had really thought about until maybe well, practically and deliberately thought about until about maybe a year ago. And what does it mean? I think I always kind of thought of resilience as this sense of like grit and
Mm,
toughness, and almost that like having good resilience meant that I had this shield that prevented negative experiences or bad experiences, or however we want to define that, from affecting me.
mm,
So resilient people were those people that could just let things, that term we have, water off a duck's back, could just let things go. It never affected them. But what I've learned in the last year with so many changes in my own life is that I think resilient people actually just have the ability to face it. So it's not this thing of like, oh, it doesn't affect me. It does affect them. It affects them, but they approach it differently.
mm,
They approach it from this space of, okay, I'm really going to look at this. What does this mean? We'll be talking a bit more about strategies later on in our conversation, but it's that ability, I think, to be able to look at a situation and somehow see some good in it. Versus getting all caught up in everything that's wrong. So in order to see good in a situation that isn't ideal, you have to look at it. You have to sit with it. You have to be with it. You can't avoid it. You can't brush it under the rug. So I think, yeah, resilience really requires this deep sense of self-awareness, which is the foundation of emotional intelligence, even in the work that you do, Paul. The ability to face things head on and to understand that it's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to move forward in whatever aspect of our life that this piece is affecting. And then you think of the pandemic. I mean,
mm.
that just adds another whole layer. But yeah,
Whole layer, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
Well, no, I think that's a good point, because I think the perception often about resilience is this toughness, this grit, almost like this military style
Yeah.
ability to deflect anything bad that happens to you. And I think you made a very interesting point that you accept the reality of the situation. You don't sugarcoat it. You realize that this is your reality, but rather than being subsumed by it, you think about what can I do in this situation? So you're looking at it in a more positive light. I accept that this has happened to me. This event has happened. I can't control it, but what I can do is I can control my response to it. And
Right.
therefore, I have a choice as to how I can now uh, respond in, and hopefully in a positive way. And that's the way. And as you said, what can you learn from it? And what should I be doing here? What can benefit me as opposed to what can harm me? So I think it's having there is an element of mental toughness and being robust in situations of stress and change. And I think it's also having that inner strength to be able to accept the reality of the situation, and to then be able to deal with them, having that fortitude to deal with them in a responsive way, responsible way and a mature way. Because
Mhm.
sometimes it's very easy, I think, to get overwhelmed with situations. And I know in the past that I felt just completely submerged, overwhelmed, and really not knowing what to do, where to turn. And so there's so many aspects, I think, that when I realize how important resilience is, it really does improve your overall well-being. And I know that in the pandemic, for example, just speaking to friends and colleagues and so on, the levels of mental health, of the depression and so on, has gone up considerably because
Yeah.
of the pandemic. And so I think a lot of that is because they just don't know how to deal with it. That feeling of being overwhelmed, and that life is out of control and you don't know how to steer it back on course. That to me is a big issue, that people really need to have these sort of skills to be able to provide appropriate responses, good mature
Mhm.
responses.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think you've just described there, like given us a really good picture of like burnout. Like
Yeah, yeah.
your description of, like exhaustion and overwhelm, and just kind of, I don't know where to go next. I don't know what to do next. Like those are symptoms of burnout. And like thinking just about even burnout in general too. Like I think, well, there's research to say that 50% of people are burning out globally.
Crazy,
Globally are
isn't it? Yeah,
experiencing some
yeah.
level of burnout. And so what does that mean for the future? And what is this burnout? Her name is Christina Maslech. I'm not sure I'm saying her last name correctly, but she's a researcher. She may be a psychologist. She, when burnout was initially defined in the 70s, she then started doing a lot of research around it. And she defines burnout as the erosion of values, dignity, spirit, and will, and ultimately becomes the erosion of your soul. And so, like, that's heavy.
Mm,
Like, that's
mm,
huge. And I think about just even the amount of loss, that the world is experiencing right now. Loss of life, loss of income, loss of
mm,
jobs, loss of relationships. That it makes total sense then that our experience of burnout would be those four things. And it would
mm.
feel like the way you're describing this complete and utter overwhelm. And where do you go next? Where do you go next when your values, your dignity, your spirit, and your will feel completely eroded?
It's more than
Where do
just
you
being tired, isn't it?
Yeah,
burnt
yeah,
burnt out. It's
burnt out.
completely like,
Yeah,
yeah, finding a way forward. Everything that you stand for is being compromised and pushed back, and I think that whole sense of feeling overwhelmed and just not knowing where to turn, yeah, to me is burnout. And what happens then in the workplace is that
mm,
that burnout turns into a lack of engagement, and just really going in to work, or working just for the dollar and not for the value it brings. Because if you don't work for an organization, and I've worked for several organizations where I felt my values do not align with the organization, or I've seen
right.
things, that
Yep.
ethically are just wrong, unsound. And what do you do in that situation? It can be an ethical dilemma. And but what I think happened to me in that sort of situation was that I just suddenly felt that I really wasn't that interested in the organization and its best interests going forward.
Right.
That suddenly I felt this wasn't the right career for me, and so eventually, when that happens, people leave. Ultimately, they will leave the organization. They will look for other opportunities because they see that the values don't align with them. They perhaps are feeling, aggrieved at some injustice.
Mhm.
And to your point, it's demoralizing. It's that sort of soul destroying. I like that erosion of the soul, because that's essentially what it is. And I think we've seen that a lot in the pandemic as well, that because of the remote working environment, I think people also have this sort of fear of missing out as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And that's why so many people are attending these Zoom meetings day in, day out, hour after hour, and getting absolutely exhausted with it, and not even realizing that they're burning out.
Mhm.
So I've actually got a poll that I
Mm.
think it'd be very interesting just to get a general view here. And I'm going to launch this poll around burnout. And so I've got 5 choices here. How far would you perceive your level of burnout? So I'm just launching this poll here, and hope everyone can see that. So please put in your answers. I'd be very interested to get your views here as to what you feel um, you are in terms of your level of burnout. Are you a very high degree? Are you a high degree, somewhat low degree, or very low degree? I'll just give a few more seconds for people to. Can you see the results, Leona?
Yeah, they're up on my screen.
Yes, yeah, they're coming up, and
Yeah,
I'm
they're
going to
coming in.
share the results with
Interesting.
everyone. Just yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Uh, just give a few more seconds for people to vote, and then I'll end the poll. And so we're looking here at, so I'm going to share these results as well, just so we can talk about these, and so everyone can see what the outcome is. So over half of our
Yeah.
people here that voting are suffering burnout to a high degree. What do you think to those results, Leona?
It's not surprising. It's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. Like when you look at the McKinsey study that was just come out, there was they collected data from December to January, so December 2020 to January this year, and they've taken data globally across 5,000 participants, and they like, so these stats are even higher than that, but they say 49% would be scoring at somewhat high or very high degree globally. So the fact that we're seeing, what's this, 57 plus 14% in that range,
that
it
mirrors
aligns
really,
with,
doesn't it?
it aligns with that data, but I think it also speaks to, we're in a pandemic, work environments have shifted, and there's probably to some degree, mismatch. Even as we think, so it's just sidebar, interesting stats even that they've done around expectations around what will the environment, what will my job look like post-pandemic, and the amount of people that, the percentage of people that want a hybrid environment has increased by 22%. 52% of the workforce want a hybrid work environment, but we also know that 40% of organizations, one, have not planned for post-pandemic work environments and are not communicating it to their people. And so now we have
that's
this
a key thing, isn't it? Yeah, that's a key thing.
Yeah.
The lack of communication is what I think is bringing the anxiety as well, isn't it?
Yep. And the stress. And to your earlier point, just even in my experiences with the clients that I've worked with, back-to-back Zoom meetings, people are exhausted. What used to be a meeting they drove to or walked to has now been, all that time that they had is now been filled in with like these other ad hoc meetings that are supposed to just be 5 minutes, but it's a meeting about an email, which I think should never happen. It's a meeting that should just be a quick phone call or a quick text message, has now become this scheduled half an hour Zoom meeting, because that's how we, and people are overrun. They come out of these meetings, they have made no time to actually then do the tasks, because every meeting, probably, imagine if you were to imagine that probably every meeting you come out of at least has 30 minutes to an hour worth of tasks you now need to work on. And you've just scheduled 5 back-to-back Zoom meetings. You have 5 hours probably of work you need to do. So guess where it's going to happen? On your weekend, in your evening, and it's going to deplete you now of your opportunities to replenish yourself and to, reinvigorate your energies so that you can go back fully focused the next day.
And I think that line is becoming very blurred because of the technology, the availability, and of being able to just answer an email just like that. The line between your family, leisure time, and your work life has become so blurred, almost to be indistinct. And it's very tempting to sit there and see an email come up on your phone or your iPad or your computer and say, oh, I better answer that now. And so suddenly you're in a constant mode of being on call almost, and being alert to work pressures. And so therefore you never get a chance to actually get the downtime. And that's invading into our weekend as well. And so when do you actually get a chance to unplug? And I think one of the big issues around remote working, as much as it's, some people will say, well, oh, it's great because I don't have to commute now, and I'm here in my home, and therefore I can see my children or my family much more because I'm not spending an hour commuting into the office morning and evening. But actually what happens is that time often will fill up with doing work. So that commuting time, which to me, actually, I quite enjoyed because it was actually downtime for me when I was on the train going into Toronto.
Right.
And suddenly, when you get a situation now where you're working from home, there's a perception amongst employers, well, they've got an hour extra either side. And then you yourself, always mentally as well, you just say, well, I can just do this now, or I can get this done. And so we're not really switching off. And so part of the problem with the pandemic and remote working is that we don't yet have the strategies to be able to make that distinction and that work-life balance. And to me, I think that's something that's causing a lot of burnout from people.
Yeah, for sure. In her book, The Burnout Fix, Yasanta, she talks about, the author of it, she's a clinical psychologist, Yasanta, she talks about our conception of, our idea, our perception, I guess, of success. You know, and originally we always thought hard work equals success. You know, that was my dad's generation. Absolutely. The harder you work, the more successful you'll be. And now things have shifted a bit and we say, well, it's not just hard work, it's smart work, right? So we have these two parallels now. So hard work and smart work is what equals success. But she would actually argue that we're missing a third of the pie. So hard work and smart work, yes, absolutely will lead to success only if we have developed core resilient capabilities. Because if we are so caught up in hard work and smart work that we can't manage our energies well, that we can't manage our leisure time well, that we are overscheduling and overstraining ourselves, and we're constantly in this stress space as far as our goals go, and we're rarely in what she calls the stretching area, which is the better place to be as far as how we grow. Well, then, yeah, this is again where burnout comes from. And so how do we even this rhetoric that I think is in so many organizations of, you know, we want to be efficient and effective, and that's all great and dandy. That falls into like the hard work, smart work. But how are we supporting our employees to develop these like core resilient capabilities so that when they face tough circumstances or have to go into a tough conversation with their people or have to make tough decisions around how their program needs to pivot in the middle of a pandemic, that they're not so burnt out from working hard and smart all the time, that they're not then making clear choices or making clear decisions around the best ways to move these forward. So again, it comes back, we kind of circle back around to this resilient piece now. So there's all this going on. And I think that's in relation to working hard and working smart, because that's what we always believe success led to. How do we now feed in this resilient piece? Because our world has changed. The amount of information we're bombarded with on a regular day, I don't think people have become weaker and that's why we can't handle this. It's that our environments have completely changed. The type of information we take in at the rate we take it in is totally different than 50 years ago. So but we're still working in these old frameworks. Then wondering why our people are all burning out, you know? So how do we start shifting this conversation and like we're today, talking about it, but supporting, you know, when we think about our clients and the clients we work with, how do we support these organizations and companies to build in resilience? How are you giving these skills and supporting your people in these skills? And not just because that's the nice thing to do, but because it means your organization will have results on the outcome. You'll be delivering quality service. You won't have turnover. You'll be saving money, you know, because you won't have massive retention issues. That there's financial implications to this for companies.
And people also not being absent as well, because I think one of the things is when people are burnt out, the rate of absenteeism increases exponentially. To your point, the staff turnover increases. And you know, when people are under stress, and I found this extraordinary that so many organizations I've worked for and heard about, they put their employees under extreme amounts of stress, working long hours, and then they expect them to be creative and innovative. And and the studies show that you cannot be creative and innovative when you are under time pressures and when you're under that degree of stress. And when you have information overload, there's got to be a point where you can actually process it. And that's why the downtime is so important. And you know, people I've spoken to often will use, for example, the early morning to be creative, maybe if they're writing or thinking about concepts and ideas, that the early morning is good because it's, you know, no emails and before the rush comes in. I'm not an early morning person myself. I wish I was. I'd probably be way more creative than I am. but you can't be creative, and you can't, to your point, working smart, isn't it? We have to redefine how the working environment is structured and try and avoid all this information overload if we're going to be able to work smart and be creative in the work we do. So what would you say, Leona, when you think about resilience? What would you say are some defining characteristics of resilient people? What is it that marks them out, do you think?
I just noticed Sebastian, did you have a question? I saw you raised your hand. Just wanted to catch that. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I did raise my hand. Can you hear me?
Yes,
We
yeah,
can.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, good afternoon from over here in Nigeria.
Oh, well,
I'm sure.
welcome.
Welcome,
Yes, please.
Sebastian.
Yes, please. And thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm just going to be very quick. Leona, I guess I've just wanted to make a point. Just yeah, I listened to your definition of resilience and then your suggestions about toughness and all that. But I just wanted to ask a question. Where is culture in all of this? Because I know that people generally don't like to work unless they are forced to, except there is something that could make them work. You know, particularly in this part of the world, anyway. So and again, I want just to find out: is resilience a function of communication? You know, and then so far the conversation has been about burnout, resilience on the individual level. What about the organization itself? The organization itself, that is that for me should be the base. The people are there, you know, and then how does culture come in? Culture of the organization, the environment, and all that. How does that fit into the contributory factor, you know, around burnout, resilience, and then making people adjust, you know, to the situation. That's just want to wrap my head around. That's what I wanted to.
Yeah, so it's more about the organizational resilience, Sebastian, is what you're concerned about and how that speaks to the culture. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Sebastian. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think culture plays such a big role in this as well, right? You think about, you know, toxic work environments, or you think about cultures where there isn't, you know, even team playing, I call it, you know, where certain people are holding more of the workload than others. There's the 6 mismatches that speak to burnout. So if you have these 6 mismatches within your work experience as an individual, but as an organization, I think we need to be aware of these 6 mismatches as well. And how are we meeting them? And those 6 mismatches are fairness. There doesn't appear to be fairness in your organization around either workload, how it's being delivered, or how manager to manager is managing your teams. Workload itself is too heavy. There's a mismatch or a breakdown in the community support. How do your teams support one another? How do managers support their people? How do managers feel supported by their people, right? It goes both ways. The mismatch of values. So as an organization, do your values align with the individual values that your people hold, and vice versa? There's, you know, we have stories in history of people who were asked to make decisions, you know, that went against their values, and they walked away, and it changed the outcome of history in some cases. And then the last 2 are lack of reward and lack of control. And so if your people are experiencing one, lack of reward or acknowledgement, both intrinsic and extrinsic, or feeling that they don't have a sense of control, or they're being left out of decision making, those 6 mismatches are like, if those 6 are present for people, they're likely burning out or burned out, or they've left your organization. So I think, like, if you want to, absolutely, we need to look at this from an organizational level. And if organizations could, you know, take a look at these 6 things and say, you know, and be more cognizant of them and say, you know, like, are we fair? And how and are being able to articulate the behaviors they engage in to show that they are, to get feedback from their people to say, do you think we're fair? You know, and they might get a very different picture from their people when they ask. And now that's data, and now there's something they can do with it. So yeah, absolutely. Great point, Sebastian.
And I think just to add to that point as well, when I think about organizational resilience as well, so I'm in the governance field, and I know, Sebastian, you are as well. When we think about some of the governance failures of organizations, I mean, one thing that, as you were speaking, sprung to mind was, for example, Siemens, that had a huge reputation issue around corruption in the Far East, and so their reputation literally went through the mud, and their share price dropped down considerably, and they needed to build a a degree of organizational resilience. How could they adapt to this? How could they restore their reputation? And so they needed to work very closely at their culture. They needed to look at their culture and understand why this had happened in the first place, and start to remove those people that had that attitude that bribery and corruption was actually okay, and this was a good way of doing business. And so the culture had to change from within, and it took several years to do it, and they needed somebody at the top that was really driving that forward. But again, you know, and they managed the media, they talked and were transparent with the media, and they were able over time to restore their reputation for integrity. But it takes, and again, that was an example of a mature response to what could have been a catastrophic disaster for the organization. So when you think about resilience, you look at it at the organizational level as well. You know, what is your ability to bounce back? And most larger organizations, they will have a crisis management plan, and then following on from the crisis management, which is the immediate sort of aftermath of a catastrophe, the 24, 48 hours. And then they will, after that, will have a business continuity plan, which is a strategy of how to get back doing business and serving clients as quickly as possible. So everything that we talk about today at the individual level is also therefore something which happens at the organizational level, but there has to be the right culture in order to facilitate that. I think that's important. And so we look at resilience of individuals, but equally resilience of teams and resilience of organizations generally. How do they react to these catastrophic events? I mean, one thing for me is that everyone that's, you know, alive, we've all had some adverse event in our life. You know, we none of us we're all scarred by life. It is a fact of life that you're going to suffer pain and stress and unwelcome change, but it really just is how you respond to it that is so critical. And so, you know, thinking about that, why do you think, Leona, that people sometimes will brush off failure and tragedy and others just sink? You know, from a individual perspective, let's think about, you know, what are the attributes that enable people to do that, do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if resilient people brush it off. I think I come back to what we were talking about earlier too, around
Or
I think it's because
respond in a positive way, isn't it?
yeah,
Really? Yeah,
yeah. I think
yeah.
it's because they actually don't brush it off. I think it's because they're fully aware of what this circumstance means. They seem to have the ability to step back, to pause, to reflect. Even if you look at it, you know, look at leaders in organizations who are going through, you know, I'm working in the social services sector right now, and these are organizations that have always been one-to-one, face-to-face in their interactions with their clients, and now all of a sudden it's all virtual. And they had to make this pivot overnight, you know, and the leaders that can step back and say, okay, whoa, and kind of do this lead from behind perspective where they stop and they survey, okay, I've got this going on, there's this variable to consider, there's this, and they take that pause and realign. Those are the ones that I think then are able to really kind of channel in the moment those emotions they might be feeling or those concerns they're feeling, to then create forward momentum, to be able to see more clearly a next step, to see what makes sense to move forward. Who do I need to talk to figure out what needs to happen next? So yeah, I would say it's more of, again, facing it head on, being willing to look at it, not being intimidated, you know, rather than, as you know, some of us do, and I'm guilty of, brushing it under the rug. I'm going to pretend that didn't happen. I'm just going to avoid that for now because I don't feel like dealing with it, or a level of procrastination, you know, because that's just too hard to kind of face right now. Yeah, so I think it's just that ability to kind of to step into the experience and to you know, really look at it
And to understand
evaluate what it means.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think understanding those sort of harsh realities. I mean, I was reading recently about the story of Admiral Jim Stockdale. He was a Vietnam prisoner. He was incarcerated for 8 years, and so he basically said, well, he was asked how did he survive that time? He said, well, I wasn't optimistic. Some of the others were other prisoners said, oh, we'll be out by 4th of July, or we'll be out by Christmas. And they kept hoping, and their hopes were dashed, and they got more and more down as a result. And he said, quite frankly, he said, most of them just died of broken hearts. He said, I accepted the harsh reality that this could happen, this could be for a long time. I came to terms with it. And I was able to mentally cope with it because of that reality. But I think also, to your point, it's understanding, you know, meaning behind the suffering that we face as well. What is the purpose? I mean, you know, people say, well, why me? And it's very easy to adapt or adopt a victim mentality around this. But as soon as you do that, then you really don't have the tools in order to frame an appropriate response. I mean, why not you? It's got to happen to someone.
Yeah. And Lucy Hone would say that. She's a researcher in New Zealand.
Right.
Yeah. Like, who would say that resilient people choose carefully what they select as their focus and where they place their attention in these situations. And she talks about her own experience of having lost her daughter at the age of 13 in a car accident. Like, that's horrific.
Yeah. How do you recover from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just noticing that Ahmad has his hand up. Did you?
Ahmad.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
Good.
And hi, Leona. Hi, guys. So maybe just share something personal and then ask for advice. So if you remember, Paul, last we met, we were in a very, very stressful situation, and that very last day. And you did talk to me that I did show resilience during that situation, correct? And then other situations kept coming up throughout 1 year. It was a very harsh year for everybody. So it's just, you hear horrible stories. And the thing is, I truly believe that I was more resilient. And then at the moment, it's just getting a little, worse. So my question would be, I've gotten hard shocks and was able to sustain, but like you said, Leona, the erosion bit is like, rust on iron. No matter how strong iron is, slowly but surely erosion would break it, right? So the idea is, how would you reinforce your resilience? So you are assuming that you are resilient. Others can tell you that, you have shown resilience in a time of strife, right? But you yourself can realize that slowly but surely you're losing that. So how would you maintain it? How would you come back to where you were at that?
Great question, Ahmed. And I can speak to this, and Leona, please jump in as well, because I think that these are things that suddenly, when you're faced with this situation, particularly an ethical dilemma as well, and you think, well, how do I work through this? I think there's a few things here. For me, it's about your support network as well, and really being able to deepen your relationships and to rely on the people that is your support network, because they can help you in so many ways. They can help you to nurture and build your resilience, in the sense that they can just be a person to listen. First of all, they can give different perspectives as well, and just remind you that you're not alone in this fight. And a lot of the studies around resilience is about having that support network and those deep relationships. I think it's very, very important that you don't have to go through these situations alone. That's the first thing. I think for me as well, also, when I've faced situations where I've lost that spark, if you like, and those values, I really look to find purpose in what I'm doing. And personally, at the moment, in starting a new business, there's so many challenges around doing that and so many frustrations. But finding purpose, a bigger purpose in what I do, drives me forward, in the sense that I'm doing work which I feel is meaningful and that can help other people. When you then face roadblocks, and stresses, you're much better prepared then to overcome them. And I think about in the current situation in the pandemic, you know, the doctors and nurses are working, you know, crazy long hours under conditions of high stress. How do they cope? How do they avoid burnouts? Well, they have a strong support network at home, but they also understand that what they're doing is saving lives on a daily basis. And so there's a huge amount of learning, a huge amount of, should we say, meaning in what they're doing. And also, I think the important thing is sometimes it can be very hard on ourselves. Now, when a friend tells you about an ordeal they're facing or a terrible mistake they've made, we all say, oh, you know, oh, that's terrible. And you offer kindness and support. But when we do that ourselves, when we mess up, when we make a mistake, we can be very, very hard on ourselves. And so we need to be more self-compassionate in that sense. We have to not be so hard on ourselves, because otherwise that negative self-talk can become our worst enemy. And so we have to treat ourselves in the same way that I think we would want others to be treated when they tell us an issue. What are your thoughts, Leona?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because it's one thing to be vulnerable on a call like this where you don't know everybody. So I just want to acknowledge you for that first off. And I think you bring up a great point around how sometimes externally people can point out, oh, you're so resilient, or, you know, we have these behaviors that we engage in that we could say, okay, yes, I'm resilient, but we're not feeling that way. There is still this sense of overwhelm or exhaustion or even cynicism, depending on how it shows up for you. And so, yeah, I just wanted to point that piece out, that I think that that's a normal part of moving through hard and tough circumstances, especially if we've developed skills throughout time and over time that we can tap into. We are still going to, and that's the interesting thing about resilience too, is I don't think we have resilience and then, okay, boom, I have resilience for the rest of my life, I'm good to go. That's just really not how it works. It's this ongoing practice, and it will ebb and flow. So I come back to what Paul was saying, compassion and kindness towards yourself as you move through these experiences, looking at your emotions and how you're feeling with compassion and kindness, not judgment, just noticing what they are through compassion and kindness. But the other two things that I would maybe mention as strategies would be your values and your personal pulse. So what are your personal values? What are your top 3 values? And even just doing a bit of a visualization exercise with yourself. I did this with a client last week around, imagine a time in your life when everything went well. Everything was perfect. If you were looking for results, you got the ideal results. It was just this amazing opportunity. It might have been a tough situation, but with an amazing outcome. What values showed up for you? If you look at that situation, what values were present? And then shifting the pendulum the other way, you know, a situation where it wasn't ideal. The outcomes weren't what you hoped. You didn't feel fully self-expressed, or that you could honestly share about yourself. What values were missing? And so when you're looking at this situation and this experience you have of kind of resilient, but not feeling totally resilient, are there values that are really important to you that you're not honoring? Because that can contribute to our sense of exhaustion, our sense of overwhelm, or feeling depleted. So if you had, you know, there's loads of online free values assessments you can do if you want to do something quick, just to realign and say, okay, right now in the middle of a pandemic, even my values have shifted compared to what they were pre-pandemic. So consider looking at that again. What are your values, and are they present in this situation? And if they're not, how can you bring them to this circumstance? And the other piece, your personal pulse, actually comes from the Burnout Fix. But Yusenta talks about pulse as a 5-letter acronym of things to think about as you're moving through these hard situations. So P stands for pace of performance. How is what you're doing deliberate and conscious? Or are we just in the hamster wheel? So taking a step back and saying, okay, what I'm choosing to do, how am I deliberately choosing to produce what I'm producing, or to do what I'm doing, or make the decisions that I want to make? U stands for undo untidy thinking. So I think a lot of us hold biases. We also hold negative biases. We can hold negative thought patterns. Just get present to those. What are they? And how can you start to just notice them and start setting them aside or competing them with a positive affirmation? I don't feel smart enough to do this today. I'm smart enough to do this today. And shifting the way that we speak, like Paul was saying, our internal dialogue to ourselves. L is leverage your leisure. And I love this one because our leisure is not scrolling Facebook. Leisure is not spending copious amounts of time on social media. Leisure is not, going to the bar and getting annihilated just to defuse, as we call it, or drinking a whole bottle of wine at the end of a workday because that's how I'm going to decompress. Leisure, the true definition of it is that replenishes the soul. It's activities that actually restore us. So where is your leisure at? And what are you doing for leisure? And I get it, in a pandemic right now, our leisure maybe is somewhat limited, but are there new hobbies you could pick up? Painting, finding places to go hiking. Gardening was one I picked up last year. So what is your leisure and how are you making time for it, consciously making time for it? This is your secure support, which is what Paul was talking to around. What's your network breath? Your network should give you breath. And your network should also be a network that gives you cognitive flexibility, but also diverse thought. And they're not just, your supportive network is not just a place to dump everything that you're feeling, woe is me, here's my pity party. Your network, while there's an element of a sounding board that you need, they also need to be able to keep you accountable. So can they hold you accountable? Okay, that's great, but what are you doing about it? What's your next step from here? How did you do on that? I'm following up. So your secure network, who is your network and who is your body of people that are going to be objective sounding boards, compassionate and caring towards you, but also hold you to account. And then her last one is evaluate your effort. And this is, how are you managing your energy just as much as your time? And this is a big one for me because I'm really good at managing my time, and managing my time is meeting, minor break, meeting, right? And I can get a lot into my day. But at the end of the day, I'm depleted.
You're
and so I'm
exhausted,
not managing
yeah.
my energy very well, right? And our energy really does matter to be able to then be able to, to be able to manage our time. But I think we've got it backwards. We think I'll manage my time and then my energy, but we actually need to manage our energy first so that we can navigate our time well. So those would be my two suggestions of areas to think about as you move through this experience. I don't know if that's helpful.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. I think the values one, I think now some core values are unshakable, which is, I think that's good. But there are some values that do shift a little bit. So like Paul said, I'm appreciating my downtime, I think, a little bit more, and because again, it's a cultural thing here that well, you are at home, so you might as well work, right? So that's the thing, and it's a major cultural issue. It's not just one boss or one company,
and it's everywhere, Ahmed, as well. Worldwide.
Yeah. So the idea is that you're sitting at home, on your couch, which makes you very comfortable, and therefore you can work 12 consecutive hours, which is
but you lose your energy, don't you?
Yeah, of course.
You lose the energy, and you may feel that you've been productive, but actually at the end of it, you're exhausted and probably heading to burnout as well. Because
Exactly.
how long, for what sustained period of time can you actually do that? I like the point that Leona, you made around the support network, because I think for me that's very important. And I have to say, one of the things for me is that when I've faced setbacks, and I've felt sometimes that, oh, I can't do this, this is, it's beyond me, and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And my support network is my wife that turns around and says, hang on a minute, think of the bigger picture, and holds me accountable. And I think that is the important point here. She's not there just for me to vent to and to listen and empathize, as much as she does do that. But she also says, but you need to work on these strategies, or let's talk about how we move forward, and then hold me accountable. And I think that's very important, that when you have you know, someone like that can really support you through these areas. And also, I think helping you to realize some of the blind spots as well that you have, some of the weaknesses that you may have, and just being able to confide in people that you trust is so important, because the most important people in my life are not the people that are my cheerleaders, but the people that will give me very honest feedback that sometimes I may not want to hear, but I need to hear. And I think that's you know, key to sort of moving forward. And I think there's other things as well that, you know, when you think about the fact that we all suffer from hardships and we all have our own you know, traumas in life, should we say, difficult situations. You need to sort of ask yourself a number of questions. First of all, I mean, are you flexible and open-minded to new ideas and opportunities? Are you making the best out of the situation? Are you really thinking about it positively, or are you fretting about the worst case scenario? Oh, you know, this is catastrophic. This is so disastrous. Are you really being patient on yourself? And we talked about that, you know, the internal dialogue that Leona mentioned. Are you really being kind enough to yourself and compassionate? And are you optimistic enough even? You know, are you looking at the big picture rather than fixating on what goes wrong? And there's so much research around this, what we call the attitude of gratitude. And it really does work, you know, being able to sort of focus on the bigger picture and the things that are good in your life, and making an intentional effort to tune into the good things in life. And I know, Leona, that Lucy Hone had talked about that after the death of her child, her daughter, that she still had two sons to focus on as well, you know, that she needed to be there for them as well. And the values thing, I think, is absolutely critical. Just sticking to your values, because it's very, very easy for our values to be compromised in the face of severe pressure. But if you have strong values, you're more likely to build resilience and resistance against those. I think also it's important to be able to handle rejection and not take things personally. I think there may be so many factors involved around rejection, whether that be, you know, in your personal life or your professional life. It's not worth holding grudges, or you know, you've got to move forward. And you've got to work through that and to not take it personally. And it can hurt when these situations happen. It's very easy to take it personally and to feel aggrieved in this situation. But you know, rejection means just that it's not right for you at that moment in time. Something will be. It's just another step in the journey to what will be right for you. So just trying to shift your perspective a little bit around that, and therefore taking that time out. Leona mentioned how important it is to preserve your energy, and I think preserving your energy to reflect on things in a positive way, and to have the capacity, if you like, to learn new things. I mean, one of the things I enjoy so much about what I'm doing now, and it's a complete departure from anything that I've ever done previously in my life, is that I'm learning so much. And that to me gives me that energy that I need to move forward. And that in some ways, it builds my resilience when I get rejection after rejection, which I still do and will continue to do in life. So yeah. But no, thanks, Ahmed. Some great points you brought up. And so I just wanted to just before we run into questions, I'm conscious of time. Leona, I just wanted to maybe just one thing you would suggest that people maybe take away from today that they can practice and work on to build their resilience. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's one question that I love. Lucy Hone calls it, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? Which is very similar to a question that I've always used throughout my career. Is this working or not working? And actually taking the morale out of it. It's not right, wrong, good, bad, mean, fair, whatever, you know, morale we might wrap around a situation. It's just like, does this work or doesn't it work? You know, it doesn't work for me, you know, as a leader to to come into the office completely depleted of my energy because now I can't actually lead my team. So I need to do something about it. And if it does work, well, then great, keep doing what we're doing. But just this real measurement of if it's not working, okay, then now what do I need to do about it? And just creating that, being able to identify that in the moment. So like, Lucy Hone talked about, does it help or harm me, this behavior I'm doing, at my chances of getting this promotion, at passing this exam, at getting up tomorrow? Okay, I'm binge watching Netflix. Does this help or harm me to get up on time tomorrow? Does my attitude towards my spouse help or harm this situation? My children, seeking counseling, if that's what we need. If we've burned out completely, like then we need to seek counseling, and that's okay, and to give ourselves the permission to do that. So it could be as small as just getting cognizant of this question and asking that of ourselves. But my other thought would be, what is one small behavior change that you could engage in, that you could start doing tomorrow, and it's easier to justify doing it than not doing it because it's that small, that will then eventually lead to lasting behavior change related to your well-being? It could be something along the lines of, that PULSE acronym. Do you have a hobby? Maybe you don't have a hobby. So what is one small thing you could do to find a hobby, so that now you can actually practice levering your leisure, so that you can replenish your energies and replenish your soul and restore yourself. So look at your life and see what is one small thing that you could do that could shift your mental, emotional, spiritual well-being as you move forward, that's going to actually set you up for success as we come out of this pandemic as well.
I think that's a great point you've raised there, and certainly that question resonated with me, because I know that when, for example, I was made redundant and losing my job, and then having to ask that question, what am I doing? Is it harming me or helping me? And sitting around on the sofa watching Netflix and ruminating about how unjust it was that I'd been, that such a wonderfully talented person as myself had been let go from the organization, really wasn't doing me any good. And so I really had to think about, well, okay, I'm faced with this reality. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is the situation. What can I do in a constructive way to get back into my positive way of thinking, and really just work through it? And I had a similar situation, I think, as well, when I was in Africa, and I had malaria, and that was probably the closest to death, I guess, a long, slow, lingering death that I had, at least, other than having a gun pointed at me. But that was a more situation where I had time to really think about how do I get through this, and thinking about your responses and what you do is how you can work your way out of it. It is so much more productive than just being overwhelmed, because you get nowhere in that situation. So no, thank you very much. That's some great points. And so I just thought it'd be helpful then, just to finish off, if anyone else has any questions. I'm conscious that we've just gone slightly over time. It's been a fantastic discussion, and I'm really happy that you've all joined us, and from various parts of the world as well, which is incredible. It's amazing.
Paul, I have something to say, and this relates to Sebastian's comment.
Please go ahead.
Sebastian talked about culture, and one of the things I wanted to just bring up is I've seen situations where you're reporting to a bully, or the leader is a bully, you're in a toxic environment. So when you talk about reality, I think it's very important to be clear on that. You can be as resilient as you want, but you're going to fail, right? So I've actually mentored someone. She was working for a bully, and it was a very small organization. And I said to her, get the heck out of there, right? Because you cannot change the culture. You cannot you withstand that kind of thing. I've been in a government entity where the person funding us and the person we reported to happened to be a bully, right? So you find that there's not much you can do, because this is, you talk about a toxic culture. This is like a toxic leader. You have no ability to do anything about that leader, right? I'm not saying always, but this is some of the experiences I've had. And in those situations, it's not so much your resilience, but your ability to see that and say, what is the best way to deal with this? Quite often, it's not a matter of hanging in there. It's a matter of leaving, right? Because you're not going to be able to survive, right?
It's a great
So
point.
Sebastian's question reminded me of that because, the culture is one thing, the behavior of the leader is very critical as well.
And particularly if the organization supports the leader as well, which has happened. I've seen that as well. And that would be one of your productive responses. Do I realize the situation and move away from it? Because clearly it's not going to serve my best purposes by staying and dealing with this, because in that situation, when you're facing a bully, your mental health, all of the things that Leona talked about, your erosion of your spirit, and will lead to burnout, and clearly don't hang in there if you can't change the scenario. But that's part of the mental processes that you have to go through. Can I change the person? How is it affecting me? And what are my most productive responses? And if that's to leave the organization, then so be it. That's at least you make an informed decision, and you're considering all of the options available to you. But yeah, never an easy situation at all.
Yeah, I would say walking away for the sake of our health is often is sometimes the decision we need to make.
Necessary, yeah.
And it's absolutely necessary. Having found myself there myself, and being in toxic work environments where, you're like, initially I'm like, yes, I can change the culture. I have all this, leadership, stuff that I'm passionate about, and I'm going to change it. But unfortunately, those above me were not bought into the idea or even cognizant of it, really, to be honest. And then, it's just, it wears you down, and it's not something I think we should be beating our heads against a brick wall over. I think sometimes we stay too long in these situations because we think we can change it, and we actually need to step away sooner. And we erode our mental health, and we erode our emotional and even our physical well-being in these environments because we think we can change it. And yeah, absolutely. Yes. To your point, we might need to choose to leave, and that's a good choice too. That's not quitting, or giving up, but that's making the choice.
I mean, we mustn't get confused. Yeah, absolutely, because we don't want to be confusing optimism with idealism. And we think we can change things, but sometimes you have to recognize that we can't. Sebastian, I just saw you had a hand up. We'll maybe make this last question. And Sebastian?
Yes, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Just following from what Leona just said right now, should I assume that there is such a thing as positive or negative resilience? Leona, is there such a thing as positive or negative resilience? Based on what you just said earlier on, that situations, you just walk away and all that. I just wanted to get this.
No, that's a good question. I don't know that I would call it negative resilience. I think resilience is resilience, and it's resilient, and it takes a strong characteristic. It takes a strong individual to be able to say, this environment is not right for me. This environment is not healthy for me. This environment is not conducive to my success. So going back to that question, is this helping or harming me? And if the environment is harming me, then I need to move away. I need to step aside, or I need to go do something else. And I think that takes, there's a level of strength that is required sometimes to make those decisions. You just even look at domestic violence situations, right? Like we need to step away from those kind of abusive situations, and bullying in the workplace at the end of the day is abuse. And if it's not right, like if it's not something that we can change, then I think we need to find the strength within ourselves to move on to an environment that is going to be more embracing, and conducive to our well-being.
And it can be the lesser of two evils as well. Yeah. In situations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. That's a great question. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending today. And I'm really grateful for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed and got some useful information around resilience. It's such a topical area and something that Leona and I really wanted to explore with you. And so thank you everyone. And I'll have the recording on my website over the next couple of days as well. So thanks again, everyone, and thanks for your insight and your questions. Much appreciated. See you all soon. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.